Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our presentation today about Medtech Made Simple, kind of what every innovator needs to know if you're developing a Medtech device. So thank you for joining us. So my name is Matthew Lawrence. I'm Head of Industry and Innovation at Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley. And Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley is here really to support innovators. If you're looking to work with the NHS and the social care system in England, we're funded from two sources, so NHS England and the Office for Life Sciences. And our real role is to help you understand how to access the NHS, what the NHS is looking for and how to do that, and really to help you as innovators understand how to navigate that system. So sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but really we're trying to simplify it so you understand the key components you need to do and how to go there. Some of the key kind of services that we provide as a Health Innovation Network is helping you with some health economics, understanding kind of real world evidence and adoption tools as well, and really just helping you kind of work your way through the journey from your concept all the way to deployment and adoption. We can't guarantee success, but we can make sure that that success is easier to achieve. So that's Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley. We support obviously the area around the Thames Valley, but work regionally and nationally. A quick thing about me. So my name is Matthew Lawrence. I'm Head of Industry and Innovation, and I've been in the NHS since 2008 in a variety of different roles. And before that, I worked in sales and marketing and in finance roles in technology companies, in charities and other kind of businesses before that. So a little bit of a broad kind of remit in the background of what we can do there. So that's an introduction from me. So I'm going to hand you over to Global Initiative, who are going to kind of talk you through today all around kind of things you need to know as an innovator about any kind of med tech. A Global Initiative is a local company to Oxford, but I will pass it over to Chris and Gareth now, if you guys are happy to kind of do a quick intro to yourselves and a little bit about Global Initiative before we get into the main bit of the webinar. Quick caveat, we're going to do a question and answer at the end of this, and we will provide some slides. You don't have to write everything down, but Q&A. So use the Q&A function if you have questions, and then we will do a question and answer session at the end, which I will chair, and Gareth and Chris can answer those questions. You have them. Okay, great. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah. Chris and I, Gareth, are from Global Initiative. We originally were science undergraduates at Oxford, and then when we graduated, we set up this, what at the time was a web design company. We were trying to be a .com, and since then we have become a software engineering agency. So we make software for clients predominantly. We work as an agency for startups, for universities, for blue chips, and about 3/4 of our work is in medtech. In fact, arguably more than that really is sort of medtech adjacent stuff as well. Basically, it's a really, really growing, burgeoning industry now. And we founded in 1999, so 26 years ago. So we've run something in the region of 500 projects in that time. So we've got quite a lot of experience of what works and what doesn't work. Look, here's a QR code for our deets, in case anybody wants to screenshot. I'm just going to leave it 15 minutes now until everyone's screenshotted that. Okay, we're going to move on. So we have made our own product as well, our own medtech product, which is called Trial Deck. So we're not any longer just sympathetic to our clients. We're actually empathetic. We know what the difficulties really are from the client's perspective as well, from our own perspective. It's a really big piece of software. It's cost us about £1 million to build it. What does it do? Its job is to make designing, launching, running clinical trials much, much easier than it currently is. So you can basically run any level of clinical trial with any number of participants and any amount of randomization and data and everything else. But what you'll notice about it is it doesn't seem very techy. And there's a reason for that. And it's because, I think initially, because of this guy. Hopefully this is going to come through. You hearing the sound on that? Maybe not. Well, I'll tell you what he's saying. It's Steve Jobs. He's saying you've got to start with the customer experience, work back to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to find out how to sell it. And he openly admits to getting that wrong quite a few times. But the point of all of this is you have to work from what the user needs. You've got to find a need first, satisfy that need, and then build the technology around it. I keep going on about this because a lot of people in their first few iterations do the other way around. They know not to do it that way, but what it is you get obsessed with this piece of tech that seems to do something really cool without thinking who's actually going to be buying it or using it. So today, Chris and I are going to run you through a broad pathway that you might take or several pathways you might take from an idea to a technical launch. And then Chris will run you through what regulatory systemic gates, basically obstacles that you'd have to pass through, especially in specifically medical situations. So when you're an entrepreneur, you start normally with actually many ideas. Many of them are bad for different reasons, and that's why it's important to have a lot of ideas. The main reason we've actually found is it doesn't, as I said before, solve a problem. So here's an example. Many pediatric interventions are missed, meaning there's a non-attendance because children become too anxious to attend. They fear the unknown, effectively. So the solution to that is to make children less anxious about interventions. In fact, that's quite hard language, make children. So I'm going to say help children be less anxious about interventions. So this is actually something we did. Now, this is borderline medical tech, but it's in the medical industry and it's for children and it's quite a fun project. So I'm going to show you an example. So we did this. It's called Hetty's Hospital. It's a story with relatable characters. It has games. It familiarizes children with what they specifically, individually will experience as one of their pathways through a health system. So we're going to use this partly as an example to illustrate some of the points we're going to make, along with some of the other products we've built, some of which might not be directly medical, but will illustrate the points that we're making nevertheless. Oh look, here are some actual children using it. Those are in fact my children from a long time ago. They're really small there. So the biggest obstacle we've ever get to see, really, getting people to build tech from the ground, is people knowing what it is they're actually going to build. So is it a full product? And what does that even look like? Or what type of thing are you going to be building? Is it, in fact, just the blueprint of a product in its first stage? And it all depends on what you're trying to achieve at different stages of your life cycle. So what I'm going to run you through is the features, or let's say less confusingly, the facets common to all digital projects that exist in various degrees. And we'll talk about the fidelities of those different features or facets, such that you can see what kind of product would be most representative of the thing that you would need to build. It's a big problem because people, it's like you go into a clothes store, but you haven't yet familiarized yourself with what clothes are. You really don't even know where to start. And this is one of the major issues and filters, I suppose, for people actually getting into entrepreneur pathways. So we're going to look at product facets. The one people can relate to the most is visual. I've called this static to separate it from interaction or from animation. So on the left is an example of a product with high visual fidelity. So this is a product we made for the NHS. It's called Paddle. It's a tool to support post-therapy in sufferers of anxiety and depression. On the right, you'll see an example of that, but in low fidelity. Still highly valuable, but you don't want to go and make something that's graphically essentially expensive to build if you haven't yet worked out what it's going to do, what happens when you click a certain thing, because you know you're going to have to iterate that design. So it's better to iterate in low fidelity settings, basically sketching, than it is to spend money on stuff you don't need yet. All of these facets will follow a similar pattern. So again, you can include animations where necessary. This might be less valuable in many digital health apps until they're launched products and you want to really, really refine the UX. But here we have a Hetty's Hospital game. So we actually built this first before anything else in Hetty's Hospital in order to raise grant funding to build the whole tool. So we actually have, this is for kids like 5 or 6 who are going in for some kind of ultrasound scan, and they can click on these different things. This is very, very high visual fidelity. In the right-hand side, you'll see something with low visual fidelity that took in the region of 20 minutes to put together, but can explain to a potential funder, let's say, what it is you're hoping to eventually achieve. We're also going to talk about user experience. So here, we're focused on creating products that are intuitive, easy to use, enjoyable for the user. This involves understanding user needs and expectations to ensure positive and seamless interaction from the start of using the product or even to discovering it to finishing with it. So on the left, we counterintuitively have a higher UX definition and thus fidelity than we do on the right. Now, this is for an actual software product we built, which sat on a hardware product, which was a bomb threat scanner. But you'll see on the left, there's a lot of explanation of what happens when you do things, what the pathway for moving through this software is going to be. On the right, although it looks more well refined, you get no real sense of how the user is going to use that. Content. So here's the crazy thing. It's the same thing, but in reverse. So on the left, as an example, it's the same prototype, but this is real content. So acetone, 2,4-dilantrotoluene, butanol, they're all real chemicals that this bomb threat tool could detect through a container. But before we put it together, we actually wanted to have low fidelity because we don't need the library to explain how this thing's going to work and get it onto the next stage. Data is slightly harder to visualize, but at its core, you need to always ask, do you need to show actual live data to generate realism, to make it actual fact? Or can you have, potentially quite complicated, can you have what we call just a bunch of randomness? So the left shows how complicated data can be. It's not, I've got a database, I'm just going to pull some data out of it. It's the challenge, especially with things like patient data, which Chris will run you through in a little bit, can present extraordinary obstacles, difficulties, both technically and obviously in compliance. Function, this part of it will be, we're almost at the end of the facets. Function is something, demonstrates how something's actually going to work. So I'm in fact going to show you trial deck again. But the reality is, this is an important lesson. This isn't trial deck. This is a video demo of trial deck. You have no idea if trial deck really does this, because I've just put a video together. Now, the fact is, it does do this. So high functional fidelity, when you're making a product, is the allowance of the user to be able to interact with it like this. Low functional fidelity would allow you to demonstrate how you want it to work through a video like this, but not necessarily possess all those functions. Scaling is normally a later problem in many product life cycles. You can build a great app, obviously, but you always need to say from the start, is it mission critical to be able to deliver this globally, let's say, to millions of users? If you're going to do, especially in medical technology, if you're going to present a global app, where are you going to keep your data? Chris, again, I think is going to cover some of that, because there are really stringent laws about where you're allowed to keep, for example, patient data. It's just popped into my head, so I'll say it. When Amazon Web Services went down just now, we stopped being able to bank for a day, which is surprising because the servers that went down were on the east coast of the US, and banks aren't supposed to keep any data of ours over there. It should all be here. So those questions, I don't know if they're being asked yet or not. But with scaling, so this is an infrastructure project we built for a client. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of complexity there, but it is a very fluid system. Or can you get away with just having it on a laptop for the stage you're developing for? Finally, commercialization. Do you need low or high commercial fidelity? What does that mean? It doesn't mean, are you going to make money from it? So Hetty's Hospital is a really good example. This has high commercial fidelity because we know exactly what the business model is. The business model is we give it away for free. So that's actually pretty easy to succeed in. Free is easy to make work, but it's hard to raise money for, which is why we actually supported this for 50% of its cost, because it's very difficult to raise money for this kind of thing if no one's going to actually make money at the end. But it was a really successful project. Kids really used it. It helped a lot. So let's take all those product fidelities and show the range of product types you can build by mixing them up a bit. So for example, example screens. These would be really useful when you're just kicking off. You want to do some crowdfunding. You want to do some early recruitment, either of your own staff or volunteers, people want to come on board, of users. You can really draw people in without having to build software, but have it as part of what you need. So you would normally, for that, you'd want reasonable visual fidelity, but you wouldn't worry about animation particularly, or UX particularly. You need to think about them a little bit. You don't need anything else. It's just some screenshots, and the actual product you build doesn't need to look like it. This is, in fact, an example from Hetty's Hospital. We built this to get some buy-in from some users. Is this the kind of thing that would make you want to click buttons? And the kids were saying yes, so we went ahead with that. And we overlaid some other graphics that we were putting in there, so it was slightly more exciting. Clickable wireframes. So these are really, really basic systems where you can actually click around to find out what's going to happen. They have very high user experience fidelity, so you know when you click on something what's going to happen. And they might have a little bit of content, but you don't need to worry about anything else. So this is what something like that might look like, or at least one status of it, so that you can understand straight away without being crowded or misaligned by any visual overlay. But actually, I don't like that because I'm not a big fan of purple. Instead, it's literally just, here's how it's going to work. You can make a proof of concept, which is a tool that allows you to test your hypotheses. Now, your hypotheses can go all over the place. Does this actually solve gestational diabetes, or does it seek to improve the lives of the people using it? So normally you'd want to touch a little bit of every facet. You want to have something that's partially usable, so that your hypothesis isn't going to be defeated by an absence of anything. But that bomb threat detector I was talking about, this is that bomb threat detector, except it isn't. It's a mock-up that we made where we could press the buttons with big bomb diffusal gloves, which are actually really lower your dexterity? And can you still navigate through the thing? Does it actually work for the user? And an MVP, this is what everybody talks about. So there's a reason that I've gone through all the other ones before I've come here. What even is an MVP? It's used for market testing normally. Every single person you will ever speak to has a different definition of MVP. It's not a clearly well-defined thing, and it doesn't need to be. Really, your definition should come down to what are you trying to produce and test in a market with the lowest possible effort. So this is just an example of spread of effort across fidelities. But the thing to remember is this is the MVP of a car. And you wouldn't sell many of those. So if your test is, can I sell a thing that gets someone from A to B, it might well fail that, but still be classified as an MVP. This would actually be a better MVP for that test. It's a horse. And in fact, if you're around at the time of Henry Ford, he said if I'd asked people what they'd wanted, they'd have said faster horses. This is the absolute epicenter of innovation. True innovation comes from anticipating needs that people can't yet articulate, rather than just improving current solutions. And this is the gamble of innovation. This is why it's important to limit your risk at every stage of the life cycle, because there are way more ways to be wrong than to be right. And a beta product, so I think this is coming up to my last slide. A beta product is normally for commercialization, for scaling. So you normally start really digging into everything, including scaling, and you get on the commercial ladder here as well. There are things beyond this, alpha products and so on. You don't need to worry about that right now. But a good example of a beta product that's in play right now is not Medtech. I couldn't find a really good Medtech example that everyone would know, but I found a good example that I think most people would know, Blue Sky, which is taking over some degree of attention from former Twitter users. So it looks like this. It's somewhat a clone of Twitter, but they haven't scaled yet properly, and their commercial model is still pretty rudimentary. But it's a good example of how you can get to this point, leveraging some key behavioral motivation in a large set of people. So I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. So now I'm afraid it's time for something a little bit different. It's all the boring stuff that you have to consider. I have the joy of being the person as a director of operations having to think about this stuff. And I want to start off by saying, so I realize I say this very late on in this process, what I'm going to be telling you is not designed to scare you off the idea of innovation, the idea of creating, the idea of taking the next small step. The idea here is to sort of equip you with some of the realities of what it means to work with the NHS and what it means to get commercial traction within the NHS and what you need to consider around that. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is paperwork. Red tape, some people call it. So most medtech ideas do not fall apart because the technology is hard, right? So technology is quite a well-known thing. Obviously, there are realms of AI and some safety features in there that become quite complicated, and actually technology is a very important part of that. But actually technology doesn't get in the way. It's mainly because there's no structure. So people jump straight into building before they understand the compliance, governance, and regulatory layers that define success. And actually, part of what Gareth was touching on, at each of those stages that you go through your product lifecycle, from the sketches on a piece of paper, the ideas that you're chatting about in the pub, whatever it might be, to that beta product, each of those have different layers of complexity around governance, compliance, and so on. So putting structure first, or very early on, is what allows your creativity to flourish. You do need to understand those constraints in order to be able to see where you can solve the innovative aspects of your idea. Good process doesn't slow things down. It gives innovation a framework for success, right? So when you're in this space, what we talk about is a quality management system. It's a requirement of many things, especially software as medical device products. And thinking about your QMS from the start ensures that governance, documentation, and accountability are all built into your innovation rather than an afterthought. And that's it is feasible to do that, and it is possible to retrospectively apply these rules and concepts, but it does make things quite difficult. You need to sort of prove quite a lot of things, which might be hard to prove. So every iteration should have a purpose, as Gareth discussed, but you should also have an understanding what this version needs to achieve, whether it is to prove feasibility, gather data, or reach a regulatory milestone, which might be later on in your life cycle. But that lays a foundation for what your next step might be and how your product will evolve. So the concept of a quality management system needs to start at the beginning, even if you're not writing one. So when we talk about structure, it's not just talking about your startup, it's also actually about the NHS. So the NHS itself is still on its own journey, right? Only 1 in 5 organisations in 2024 is digitally mature. And the NHS defines digital maturity as the ability for an organisation to respond to change and use technology to improve outcomes. A mature NHS organisation links its digital strategy directly to its core objectives. So it builds robust infrastructure, empowers knowledgeable teams, and uses data for continuous learning and improvement. That's the kind of stuff that agencies like GI help with. So the things that we've shown you so far, and it's very true for Trial Deck, making that structure simple so that you've got a framework to build your innovation within is what we do. I may have misread some of that. Just click. Right. So one of the questions that was published out on social media is, do you have to be tech savvy as a founder? No, you don't. You need focus, you need process, and you need partners who understand each part of what you're trying to achieve, right? So non-technical founders often move faster because you value governance, compliance, and collaboration, and recognize early that success depends not just on the technology, but on the alignment with the health system that will ultimately use it. So in this case, the NHS, right? And we've done work with companies that have solutions over in the States as well, and that's a whole other kettle of fish, which we won't touch on just today, but maybe one day. So let's be honest though, selling into the NHS or working with the NHS is quite difficult. According to Pulse of the Sector, almost a third of health tech companies did not even bid for NHS tenders last year because the requirements were too complex, and another fifth pulled out their products entirely because the prices did not cover the costs. This statistic tells you something really important. The challenge is not not solely in innovation, it is in navigating the NHS and its processes. So who you speak to, how you get to speak to them, and what frameworks matter all make a difference. So that's why organizations like the AHSN and the Hill are so powerful and so helpful in these situations. They help founders understand how to connect innovation to the NHS and how to speak to the right people, hopefully at the right time in your pathway as well. So where we sit, where we'd like to make a difference, is that we take your goals for your innovation, whether they're clinical or research goals or any others, and we turn them into something that's real, deployable, and trusted, that meets the NHS requirements from the get-go. So compliant, secure, and ready to scale. As a director of operations, my first responsibility is to make sure that the technical delivery matches your ambition. But my team's value is to make sure that you look through 3 key lenses: compliance, governance, and regulation. When those three are considered from the very start, adoption and scale stop becoming obstacles and start becoming outcomes. So, compliance. There's a lot of things up there. I will talk you through them briefly. It's not about red tape, right? All of these things are designed to create trust. So they might be different parts of trust or different levels of trust or trust for different people. When you're dealing with a patient or research data, you're dealing with a natural person's identity. Now, some of you will know GDPR, the first one on that list, and that is the first legal and ethical responsibility that you have to that natural person. As soon as you start processing their data, which incidentally includes storing it, looking at it, whatever it might be, as soon as you have that data, you have to be able to show that you're handling it lawfully, securely, and transparently. Now, the other ones are augmentations of that or specific to certain parts of the NHS. I don't have time to go into all of them today, but I'm very happy to discuss them. So all of these are the language of assurance for the NHS and for your research partners if you rely on them. What they're doing is they're demonstrating that you understand your responsibilities and that you have governance in place to uphold them. It's important to note, oh, sorry, I've already noted that. At GI, we have some ISO certifications. So some of you may know about ISOs. We've got 27001, which is cybersecurity, and 9001, which is quality management. And what that means is when we start a project, we're already using that QMS I was talking about earlier to deliver at a particular level. When your product gets closer to clinical use, so for example, being software as a medical device, some other standards come into play. Now, obviously, there's the MHRA certification based on the risk to the patients or users of your product and how you're dealing with that. We'll touch on that a little later. But there are ISOs for this as well, like 13485, which is for medical device and software quality systems. 14971 is looking at clinical risk management. So when you see a clinical risk, how do you deal with it? How do you define them? How do you mitigate them, etc.? And there's 62304, which is an IEC, similar to an ISO, and that's for the life cycle of your medical device. And each of these things, there is an expectation that you meet some of these standards in part or in whole, depending on how far up the scale of software as a medical device you go. So class 1 has a lower threshold than, say, a class 2A product with. Incidentally, if you're considering AI as a software, as a medical device, your threshold is instantly a lot higher. Class 1 medical devices are completely inappropriate for AI use for medical devices. So just bear that in mind. It's a really hot topic. So.
Can I just jump in just really quickly?
Yeah.
I would also, I would strongly recommend against the highest possible terms using AI to generate medical anything, intervention or diagnosis, because the likelihood of hallucination, even if you can trim it to getting it quite low, still exists. And you don't want a single hallucination in your medical product.
Which I think, which is why AI as a medical device's threshold for the classification is so high, because there is an understood and real risk in trusting something else to make those sorts of decisions. So
can I jump in really quick, Chris?
Yeah,
I've just put in the Q&A function, there's a guide the NHS Innovation Service provides, which includes a really kind of just introductory guide to some of those regulations people need to be aware of, because there's a lot of acronyms there. I'm familiar with all of them, but I think people starting out may be a little bit scared by them. But if the Innovation Service guide it's a product agnostic kind of thing, just saying what the NHS is looking for and why they're looking for it. And that AI one, the NHS is looking for AI, so it's a positive thing they want to do, but yet it's going to be tricky to prove that it is fully safe. So most of the AI things are clinical support tools. They are not in and of themselves diagnostic tools that can be left on their own at the moment. So yeah, the interesting point to be aware of.
Absolutely. For productivity, we use AI a lot, even in trial deck. But in actual diagnosis, intervention, therapeutics, it's quite dangerous. Sorry, Gareth.
Thank you. Okay, so yes, there's a lot of acronyms. Thank you for sharing that. But it's not just about certificates and things you can put on the wall, right? There's an aspect of people that you need as well. So when you start dealing with the NHS, there is an expectation around things like having a clinical safety officer. Now, it might be appointed by them, it might need to be on your side. You will need to understand your level of responsibility around the data that you're storing and whether you need a data protection officer. The ICO,
Information Commission as well.
thank you, yes. I completely forgot that for a second. The ICO has a really good guide about how to think about what level of data you're looking after and what that means in terms of things that you need to have in place, safeguards, data protection impact assessments, register of processing activities. All of these aspects are things that people like the DPO and the data protection officer and your clinical safety officer will help manage and own as part of your product. And those don't have to be internalized, by the way, as well. Those are services that are external and resources you can bring in. So another thing that Gareth touched on is PPIE, so patient and public involvement and engagement. Now, one of the things when you're building a piece of software for medical use is that you need to demonstrate each feature's origin, right? So you need to explain why you have this feature, why it is there, and how you've come about any decision that has led to it being put into your product, alongside all of the risk registers and so on for that, the traceability in terms of tests and so on. But using patient and public involvement and engagement groups is an incredibly powerful way to not just validate that your product has got potential, but also to start showing the design requirements for certain certifications that you'd want later on. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Right, governance is the next lens. I think possibly the last one. So this is all about knowing, it's about accountability, right? So coming forwards from my point about how you're designing things, how features end up in your product, your software as a medical device, it's knowing who approved what, when, and why. It starts the moment you want to start collecting data. So even for that GDPR requirement we talked about earlier, you actually do need to say, why am I collecting this data? You can't collect data just in case you might use it later. That's not a reason to collect data. So you have this duty to acknowledge the risk, assess the potential impact if it were lost or misused, and you need to document all of that. It sounds like a lot of work, but actually, again, the ICO provides a lot of templates and useful tools to be able to navigate this very easily. And that's true at every level of compliance and such. I'm going to skip over a little bit more, sorry. Validation, verification, and risk management are not barriers. This is really important. You need to consider them as part of your process. They're part of the value that your innovation is providing. Without those things, you're just another person throwing something into the wind. Whereas if you've actually considered it, that's where the NHS, that's where commissioning bodies actually see there to be value. So you're proving you've got control. And again, control is really, really important. So our role is to build governance at the start of a process. So when we're working with startups and so on, we consider that as well at the beginning. Dark skies.
Yeah. It's the contrast.
Thank you. So the moment that your software interacts with a clinical decision making, you start being regulated. So you are now, I mean, we've talked about regulation in the past, so GDPR and so on. But now you're looking at being a software as a medical device. And understanding your classification shapes everything: the design, the process by which you validate, testing, your documentation, what level of documentation you need, and even how you might raise some of your fundraising. You can't improvise some of this compliance later. Once you've met that threshold of being software as a medical device, super duper huge recommendation to get that QMS, that concept early on. And vibe coding might work for a consumer app, but it is not appropriate for a software as a medical device. You need total control, visibility, and understanding of what you've built, as well as how you have validated, checked the risks, and mitigated them as best that you can. Regulation ensures safety, accountability, and market access, and that's important. It's not a constraint. It is your license to operate. It is your license to prove to the NHS that you are, in fact, as good as you say you are. So they're not enemies, regulation and good design. With the right operating and design procedures in place, you can still be agile, right? So it's perhaps less agile than someone who's vibe coding, I don't know, an app for consumers, but it's certainly more agile than you might see in some other software development practices. You can build your prototype, you can build a research instrument, and you can build a decision support tool before every part is formally documented. You can test all of these theories and you can work towards your final piece, but do have that QMS, that idea of how you're going to validate all this in the back of your mind. So regulation rewards teams that can show that they innovate safely. That's really the takeaway here, right? And the NHS spends a lot of money on health tech, but procurement is increasingly focused on compliance and cost effectiveness rather than novelty alone, that should say, right? So I only have a couple more slides. Disciplined delivery enables speed. Reusable frameworks, defined life cycles, standard operating procedures, all of these things, automated testing, they will really make sure that the speed at which you're developing is met by its rigor. So Trial Deck is a good example of this. Its whole concept is to deliver this for researchers who are on a tight timeline, who don't necessarily have the overheads available to manage compliance and so on. And the whole idea behind it is a standardized platform, standardized framework, which allows them to accelerate into that space. And it does the same for digital intervention design as it does for clinical design. A proof of concept may not need to be certified as a medical device, but having a vision of that ensures you're lining yourself up for success, right? Rigor protects creativity. You're noticing now, I hope, a theme in what I'm saying. None of this stuff is meant to be scary, but it is an important part of success within the NHS and within other commissioning bodies. But that rigor does have some costs. So let's touch on that very briefly. So there are some intangible costs. There are decisions that you're going to need to make when you're building your product, which may seem counterintuitive to your users. A good example of that is multi-factor authentication. Now, it's a lot smoother now, but when it first started appearing, we had clients who didn't want multi-factor authentication because it got in the way of the user's experience of registering or signing up or logging in or whatever it might be. It's pretty everyday now, but that was a problem. You know, a little while later, one of the NHS trusts was using a piece of software and they didn't have multi-factor authentication turned on. There was a data breach, and as a result, they were fined an enormous amount of money because of that one decision to remove multi-factor authentication. So encryption choices are similar. You know, the highest level of encryption, protecting your data absolutely, incredibly, means that actually there's only one set of keys to that. And if that set of keys is lost, then your data is lost. And those are decisions that you have to make. There are also tangible costs. So all that validation and certification, those ISOs, they all cost money. Secure hosting, infrastructure, you know, these things, AWS sounds like it's a panacea. And in a lot of cases, you can get some free credit to help support an innovation or a new product. But once it starts kicking in, it can ramp up very quickly. Scaling is a huge potential cost. So again, I'm going to say it one more time. This isn't about scaring you. It's about preparing you for the next conversation, preparing you for the next iteration of your project, and making sure that you understand the full picture. Now, this nut has been cracked a million times. You're not the first person who is creating a new innovation in medtech, and so this path is well trodden. The frameworks and pathways exist. There is support available. You know, the AHSM and people like us are all here in order to help navigate those things. Right, it's all about partners. Partners like the AHSN, partners like us. We call ourselves launch specialists, right? Because what we do is we help you on that journey. We get you to a point where you have an idea. We walk you through all of the aspects, whether it be technical, whether it be governance or certification or whatever it might be. And we even take clients to the point where we help recruit the right leadership and develop the right talent within their organizations and develop their solution whilst we're doing that around them. So obviously we handle the technical delivery and we handle the governance and compliance side of things. And the idea there is so that we don't slow you down. So a really good example of a piece of work we did recently was an opioids tapering app. And that went from commissioning to prototype ready for grant funding and testing with PPIE in 3 months. Now, if you've ever worked with the NHS or an academic organization, contracting can take 6 months. So it's quite impressive. If you need speed and rapidity and agility, finding agencies like us, finding partners like the AHSN, they're here to shortcut those processes. So our team has been through NHS and NHRA processes many, many times. We know what adoption looks like, and we know how to build things the system can trust and implement. So what's your next step? Talk to someone. If you have a product that's, someone mentioned earlier that your product was at a particular stage, you might be needing help looking at what the future looks like, what your roadmap may need to include. You may want to be talking funding, you may want to be talking brilliant, Shane, thank you. And you may want to be talking to Matthew and his team about what is the next bit that you need to navigate and so on. So taking concept to launch, going through funding rounds, and all the way to Series B and beyond is the place that these sorts of partners really help with. We now host quite a lot of medtech businesses, and there's quite a lot of companies here. I was supposed to click this earlier when I was saying this has been cracked. You can do it because it's it's a well-trodden path. Great. So some of this comes down to simplicity, and simplicity is not about doing less, as this this quote suggests. Sometimes it's about changing lanes or letting someone else drive, or making sure that you've got the rigor in there to be able to create that simplicity. Simplicity is very much earned. And in medtech, it's from doing your groundwork properly, from design to delivery, through compliance, governance, and validation. And each iteration from wireframe through proof of concept to MVP and beyond has a clear role in each of those aspects, from each of those lenses as well. So I'm not saying that the next step is enormous. This is going back to it's not scary. The next step is always small. It's understanding what you need to put in place in order to not limit your vision. So as soon as you start falling down on some of these hurdles, like compliance, governance, and so on, the NHS will limit your vision. And what really your job is to focus on what counts, your users, your outcomes, and your purpose. And if you do that, everything else falls into place. And it will feel natural at a point, I promise. Gareth doesn't like what I do because it's boring.
No, I like that you do it.
You like that I do it,
Yeah,
exactly. But the best innovations, I'll leave you with this thought, are not the ones that do everything. They're the ones that do what matter to your users and your commissioners, and that they do it right. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris and Gareth. Thank you very much for that. So if you've got any questions, you can put them in the Q&A section on Teams. There's a few questions I've already kind of got in my head, if that's okay, just to start off. So you've talked about a lot of things that people need to think about. So I think you talked about governance, compliance, and regulation. How much can an innovator do on their own? I know that it's important to get partners and do that stuff. How much could they do of that kind of wireframe design, that kind of initial thinking before they need to start engaging the stuff as well?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'll take it from the governance side, and then Gareth will take it from the product side, if that's right. So from a governance perspective, so we're actually talking to a innovator in Bristol, at Bristol University, who's created an instrument called a PROM, or a patient-recorded outcome measure. He's validated it, and actually he decided to go and write all of the governance documentation, all of the validation for a Class 1 medical device. And it's great. I'm really, really impressed. It did take 18 months, just to put it into perspective, but he had a full-time job and a family life, so I imagine that it wasn't a full-time endeavor. But you can do it. You know, all of the information is out there. The question is, do you need some help accelerating into that? Do you need some help navigating some of the questions? There are a couple of things you would really want to have a professional to look at, a certified professional. And some of those are around marking, so CE marking, for example, that really does need a professional to help navigate those stories. And actually the interactions with the MHRA come much easier through someone who's got a contact there as well. We have some people that we use, and I wouldn't change that.
In terms of, so we've obviously so far focused mainly on software. So in terms of early speed up, yeah, people can do a lot of stuff on their own. I think when you're actually developing your thing a bit further out, let's say it's an app, it's important to use language, visual language, functional language, and so on that people understand, which might require some onboarding, some learning curve. But the initial phase of trying to persuade somebody that they either should invest a small amount of money or they should partner with you for growth or something like that, I absolutely advocate people should be having a crack at themselves, maybe iterating a few times, testing their ideas, because that can be quite expensive if you go through an agency. Agencies are best when you're pretty well focused on what you're trying to achieve. You've thought about that, you've probably mocked something up, all the way up to, you've launched the product. And once you've launched the product, agencies become less valuable because actually you should have your own team really to maintain and develop the product. In terms of hardware, it's hard to know as well. So I'm diabetic. I have insulin pens. One thing I found always really surprising is there's no memory to the pen. Like, you can't, if you pull the lid off, I think it should tell you pulled the lid off just now, and the last time you pulled the lid off was 3 hours ago, because a number of times I forget that I took insulin, or forget that I haven't yet taken insulin, and now I don't know, should I take 2 doses? I don't know. So I looked into trying to solve that problem, and you can't, it doesn't matter if you're a carpenter, that kind of thing, you do have to go to some kind of manufacturer probably to fix. But there are still loads of Vibe hardware things.
And 3D printing is
3D
more
printing.
accessible now.
You're absolutely right. And what's that? Arduino setup and stuff like that. So yeah, there are tools around everywhere, and Oxford's getting to be a much better place to hack things out. Sorry, we really laboured that one.
That's great. Thank you. I think, Chris, you mentioned this. I can't remember, or maybe it was you, Gareth. You mentioned vibe coding. So I think that's a little bit specific for some people. Can you explain kind of what vibe coding is, and also what it isn't, for those who might be trying to use that as an approach to getting their product developed?
Yeah, I think again, it's one of these new terms that means different things to different people until people settle on the right thing. But broadly speaking, it means using tools that are available where you can plug and play different facilities and create a product out of it. So you can use generative AI to write some code, and it'll tell you how to deploy that. You can use microservices that exist that might, for example, notify a patient about something, and that you can define what that notification looks like and so on, and stick all of that together such that it works. But works is quite a loose definition of what it does, probably because it might fall apart under normal use, but it can demonstrate what you're trying to achieve. But there are an enormous number of tools now available. I think the risks of doing that, as always, it reminds me a lot of, now I'm going to show my age, desktop publishing in the 80s came out. It's basically when the precursor to Word, and people could suddenly use all the fonts and all the colors everywhere on a page, and it didn't make production better. It didn't make higher quality of output. It really reduced the quality, because suddenly people didn't have rails. They didn't have constraints by which they must organize their thoughts, and that is an issue in vibe coding.
Yeah, I think that's the Apple Mac hitting people's desktops, where they could use different typefaces and fonts, where before you couldn't do that. So I'm showing my age. I do remember those old desktop publishing and things where you didn't see what you were producing until you hit print or you output it. So that is a way to look at it. I guess a lot of people will have an idea, and they'll need to know how to deploy it. So I think, I've seen there's some kind of companies out there who will say, we've got a no-code platform on which you can launch your product. And now, again, I think from what you've just mentioned, there's going to be limitations to what that product can do if you're using someone else's platform to deliver it. But again, it might be a way to kind of demonstrate that there is a market, there is a desire for that product going forward. And I think some of the comments you've made about the NHS, medicine is a highly regulated industry. So I wouldn't put any illusions to people that it's simple. Medicine, rightly so, is highly regulated. So one, in doing the diagnosis and any of those treatments, but secondly, how you manage that data. That data is very, very specific and very, very private to people, and needs to be treated really carefully. Any data breach is going to be really problematic, not only for the company, but for the patients or the clinicians involved as well. So be careful with that. Yes, do great things, but I think all those points you mentioned before about governance, compliance, and regulation, they're there for a reason, particularly for really regulated industries like the NHS and healthcare. So that's great. So I don't know, guys, if you want to bring up any of the kind of main points. I think Shane's put something in the chat, just saying he'd love to have a call. I know that what you offer from Global Initiative is you do offer kind of an introductory call to kind of do a surgery with them and to kind of talk them through how they do that stuff. So I guess if you, that QR code, if you want to put that QR code back up for people, or we'll send out the slides later. Thank you. well prompted. If you want, we'll send out the slides later, but we'll put contact information for Global Initiative. We'll also put contact information for us at Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley, where we're happy to chat to you and kind of have a talk through about what it is you're trying to do, whether there's a place for it in the NHS, and if not, it can be in health and social care more generally, or just general well-being. That's absolutely fine. And there are some things out of Oxford which, although we support the NHS in England, it may be that it's something internationally is more desirable in the US or other markets because of the way the regulation works, or just the way they can do things differently. So just be aware of that. So I don't know if Chris and Gareth, do you want to close up with anything? Any other comments from you before we close the session down?
We're just really happy to chat. In particular, my role is really just engagement. So I love talking to people about their ideas. I won't charge for that. I think it's just really interesting. People should feel free to come around to our offices. We're on 33 to 35 George Street. And it's probably best to let us know in advance. Yeah, our sort of much grander hope is that Oxford becomes more like Boston, where we have non-siloed, really integrated venture funds, research spin-outs, hack groups that can collaborate on interesting ideas. And I think we've been restricted a little bit in the past by doing that. We want to be a part of that story.
Great. Thanks very much. I mean, I've literally just come back from California in the last couple of days where I've seen VC, academic, innovators, and everyone's got a startup idea in their back pocket, it seems.
Yeah.
That could be great. It could be terrible as well. But yeah, I think controlled development and also doing it in a way that benefits everyone is the real way to go, but having that ecosystem that supports it. So thank you so much, guys from Global Initiative, for explaining that. Hopefully everyone's taken something from that. I've certainly done something there. So really helpful. Again, get in touch with us or Global Initiative directly if you have any more questions. And thank you very much for joining. We'll put a recording up and we'll send slides out later. But thanks very much. Thanks, guys.
Well, thanks for having me.